Hi everyone, thanks for coming along today to this launch of our toolkit for the ethical use of generative artificial intelligence in learning and teaching. So we're going to have an opening address from Professor Paul McSweeney, and then we are going to have a presentation from myself and Loretta, who worked on the AI Squared project for the last about 6 months, I think. And then we will have a panel discussion with some participants from the AI Squared project who contributed to this toolkit, and then we will open up to some questions from the floor. So I'd just like to introduce Professor Paul McSweeney now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tadhg. Thank you indeed. And it's great to see so many people here on such a foul day. So well done for making it over here from wherever home is for you. So just as we can't imagine computing today without a keypad, mouse or multi-touch, going forward we will not be able to imagine computing without co-pilots and natural language prompts that intuitively help us with continuation, summarization, chain of thought, reasoning, reviewing, modifying and acting. That's not me, that's actually a gentleman called Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft. And I think it just makes the point that AI, or generative AI in this broadest sense, is really going to be a major part of the future for us. In fact, in my 30 years on the staff here, I don't think I've ever seen anything like ChatGPT to catch the attention of the academic staff as efficiently in all of that time. So it's very, I suppose, opportune today that we're having a meeting on ethical use of generative AI in learning and teaching as part of the National Academic Integrity Week. So I think much of the attention on large language models or on generative AI has been in the context of assessment, and I'm sure most of you have tried it, and for those of you who have, it's good. It's not great, it's good, but it does have some limitations, like for example lack of domain-specific knowledge, limited understanding of context, inability to fact check, lack of creativity and critical thinking, and inability to understand the purpose of the writing. But it is a challenge that we are facing as a university, and it's hard to remember that it's not even 1 year old yet. It'll be the 22nd of next month. It will be 1, so it really is a toddler, and I can just imagine what it's going to be like when it's a precocious teenager. When things going, but it's a very fluid situation. But in many ways, what we're looking at here is, I suppose, the next step in the AI that is, I suppose, already part of our lives in many sense. Everything from the algorithm that chooses which tweet X thing that we look at, all the way to Netflix. But AI can't be banned. We can't turn the clock back. And for better or for worse, it's going to be part of our future. And a point I've made regularly is that there is no technological solution to detecting text written by AI, and possibly unlikely to happen. There could be a kind of an arms race between generative AI and AI detectors. So I think pedagogy and assessment design are our only real defences going forward. But we do need to understand the challenge going forward. And there's a lot of activity going on in UCC and indeed nationally in terms of generative AI. The key stakeholders on campus here are constantly talking to each other about it. The VPs and Deans of Teaching and Learning Network within the IUA have regularly exchanged information. We have the Teaching Today site in UCC, a lot of existing information, including most importantly actually the short guide to assessment using AI, which was launched there relatively recently. And also, SATLE, I say Catherine in front of me here, has been very active in seminar series on generative AI. And indeed, this AI Squared project, that's artificial intelligence and academic integrity, which I suppose in some ways is looking at exploring the potential benefits of AI and issues around inclusivity and access to AI technology, as well as its advantages and disadvantages. I often think, though, we need to not get too bogged down in the area of assessment in AI. It is a challenge, but I'm not convinced it is the challenge that's facing us as things go down. I've said before that every major technological change has winners and losers. The invention of motor cars back in the day probably put a lot of blacksmiths out of business, but opened up lot of opportunities for mechanics. And I think in many ways the effect of AI on our curriculum will be in the long term the major thing we need to watch out for going forward. So, to continue on my metaphor, that we're not educating students to be blacksmiths in a world where that needs mechanics. But coming back today, I think it's great to see UCC and the Skills Centre championing the cause of academic integrity, and this AI project and the resulting toolkit is a lovely example of this in practice. We've put some money from the SATLE funding, that's the Strategic Alignment of Teaching and Learning Enhancement, which is some money we get every year from the Higher Education Authority through the National Forum. We've invested a little bit of that into academic integrity, both the good cop side, as I often call Loretta, in terms of support and advice to students, but also in a post in the Registrar's Office, I'll be looking at more policies and procedures and records. And given the broad context of AI, the launch of this toolkit is very timely, given the fears around generative AI in higher education. But it's also important to explore the way in which this really exciting new technology can be used ethically in higher education. Unlike, the last year's challenge, essay mills, it's not black and white. Essay mills bad, doing it yourself is good. There's a lot of probably grey areas in the middle that are of, that generative AI could be very useful for students. I asked ChatGPT some months ago to give me in 10 bullet point forms the main themes in Homer's Iliad, which it did. Now, if I were then to use that to structure my own essay going forward, is that a problem or not? Is it just a modern version of, some of you might remember the old Cliff's Notes going way, way back and taking that summary off the shelves. So there are going to be grey areas, and it's very important that we educate students appropriately for this broad new world. So this project has brought together staff and students across UCC, and it's paired staff with students, kind of a student as partner approach. And how important it is to get student input and feedback in a project like this. So I'd like to thank Dr Loretta Goff, our Academic Integrity Officer based in the Skills Centre, and Tadhg Dennehy, who's a Senior Tutor in the Skills Centre, for their invitation today and for all the hard work that they've been done in terms of this project. So I'll hand over to them, and I think there's also Academic Integrity Bingo at some stage, is that right? One tomorrow. And if you haven't done that, you really should. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul. So myself and Tadhg are going to give you first a bit of kind of context around the AI Squared project and our framework for that, and then we'll run through kind of the toolkit and introduce that to you before we move to the panel. So academic integrity, of course, was a large part of the framework for this. And while generative AI does pose a threat to academic integrity when it's used to bypass learning, in the case of what the European Network of Academic Integrity has termed unauthorized content generation, instead of plagiarism, it can also be used ethically in several ways to enhance the learning process. So with this project, that's what we wanted to consider, how Gen AI could be used as an assistive tool, and how it works within the assessment process. Are there opportunities to integrate it where it makes sense, or to integrate it into learning activities, while of course also being wary or mindful of cases where it is going too far and how we can mitigate against the risks of those as well. So academic integrity, first of all, when separated from its counterpart of academic misconduct, which often becomes the primary focus, if we bring it back towards academic integrity, it's focusing on kind of those positive actions, and positioning it this way can act as a kind of key motivating factor for student engagement, concentrating on what skills you're developing, being proud of your own work, and those things. So emphasizing academic integrity in this developmental educational approach brings the focus of attention back to the learning process, which is a key part of, if we're going to use Gen AI in that we're focusing on what that learning process is. So again, kind of as Paul was saying, not necessarily just the assessment, but what are we learning around it? And then also developing your own skills, placing importance in that, and in standing over your own work as well. So the European Network for Academic Integrity does recommend that staff and students be guided on the benefits as well as the limitations of AI tools, and that's something we wanted to bring across in this project, and that students be provided with the opportunity to kind of develop these skills and play around with skills. Because this technology is becoming increasingly ubiquitous, so we need to underpin it with that kind of ethical framework and introduce it in that way. So in this case, then, one way to achieve this is to introduce emerging technologies alongside the principles or concepts of academic integrity, and doing this in a way so that they're associated together, so that it's associated as good practice. And doing this also addresses several key points that need to be addressed when introducing things like Gen AI into learning. So what I'm going to do then is what we've done kind of with this project and what's part of the toolkit as well is mapping the use of Gen AI into the principles of academic integrity. So we have the 6 fundamental values that underpin academic integrity up here: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. And when we look at use of Gen AI through these lenses, a few kind of key points come across of what we need to do, essentially. So in terms of honesty, to maintain academic integrity, it's critical that individuals are honest about what's their own work and what isn't, which means that any use of Gen AI should be transparent. And staff can model this for students by making clear or acknowledging their own use of Gen AI. If it's used to create images for slides, or if you've used it to create a lesson plan, even if it's not the final version, but you brainstormed ideas from it. These are chances to kind of model how that was done, why it was appropriate, and maybe similar ways that students might be able to use it as well. So then for trust, it's important because Gen AI is known to hallucinate, it's known to contain bias, and it's not a credible source in itself. So it's important to raise awareness of those facts, that it's not something that we can just take and use as it is for its reliability, which means it's important to critically analyze the outputs, which encourages learning in itself, and to help prevent the spread of misinformation. So we already have kind of being transparent and critically analyzing outputs. Then for fairness, to ensure fairness at all levels, I suppose from individual classrooms to programs to the university, clear guidelines for how and when to use Gen AI should be in place, because this could vary depending upon the course, depending upon the type of assessment that's being used. So to be making clear in each case where it is acceptable to use and where it isn't. And then respect for the learning process means that Gen AI tools are not used in any way to bypass learning, of course, which is again maintaining academic integrity, only in ways that might enhance the process. With responsibility then, we come back to this idea of critically engaging, because AI is not responsible for what it produces, it's predictive technology. So this is again where the human role comes in. If we're using pieces of it, we need to be responsible about that and fact check, make sure that we're engaging with it critically, another way to kind of learn about how to use it. And then courage, of course, is, it can be easier to just use things, get a quick answer, but taking the courage to kind of pursue the right path of doing it and staying true to the values of academic integrity, making sure we're not bypassing learning. So with this, some of the key things that emerge are, again, being transparent in use, modeling use of this, having clear guidelines in place, and critically analyzing or engaging with outputs from the tool. And this all acts as kind of a first step towards the responsible integration of new tools like Gen AI in higher ed, clearly aligning them with academic integrity both in discussion, introduction of them, and in policy. And doing this forms that kind of ethical foundation that then can be built on with specific guidance according to class or discipline or so on, or particular tasks. So the other element of this that we were looking at in terms of kind of considering the assessment process was thinking about kind of inclusive assessment design. So the principles of academic integrity are also encouraging students to take an active role in their learning, have that responsibility for the learning, and this can be further supported through their inclusion as partners in assessment design, rubric design, learning activities, and so on, and or by including a degree of choice in the assessment task itself or how it's approached, while still providing those kind of clear guidelines and expectations. So this, of course, isn't going to necessarily eliminate instances of misconduct, but the element of agency there does act as another mitigating factor against unethical use of Gen AI by encouraging students to foster or feel a deeper connection with the assessment tasks and what they're doing, and to understand the value of these in their education, in their journey. So In this, we're simultaneously kind of promoting inclusion, widening opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning, and finding ways to kind of integrate this. So when thinking about that authentic assessment, programmatic assessment, distinctive assessment, open-ended assessment that allow for kind of a diversity of engagement, all feed into this assessment for inclusion practice. And they also offer opportunities for ethical integration of generative AI, recognizing that these tools are increasingly being used in the workplace, and allowing for aspects of assessment to evaluate students' development with and without the use of these in a fair and transparent way. So introducing generative AI into learning and teaching practices in a careful, considered way means that we can ensure that students will be well informed and develop those critical digital and information literacies, which kind of are going hand in hand here, while still measuring their core skill development independent of these tools that are crucial for kind of program or learning outcomes. So that's kind of some of the guiding framework in terms of what we're looking at with academic integrity and with assessment practices in the age of AI. So now I'll hand over to Tadhg to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the aspects of the project, how it was organized.
Thanks, Loretta. So I'll just give a brief introduction, I suppose, to the AI Squared project. So as we're all aware, advancements in generative AI technology are already having a significant impact on higher education. And an easy to access and very basic, I suppose, to use piece of software like ChatGPT makes it very easy for a student to do the wrong thing, to engage in academic misconduct, to cheat even. And though AI tools such as this do present a very obvious threat to academic integrity, there is also an opportunity for digitally enhanced learning, teaching and assessment. And it's through this research project, AI Squared, Academic Integrity and Artificial Intelligence, that we're hoping to explore some of those, or we hope to explore some of those methods and ways. So this project was conducted throughout the summer with the help of some of the panelists that you'll be hearing from in a while. And the hope with this project was to demonstrate a middle ground, to consider how this technology can be used as an assistive tool, perhaps, in higher education, without foregoing independent thought, critical thinking, analysis, and ultimately the intended learning outcomes of a given module or course. Now, I'm sure many of you present today are aware of what exactly generative AI is and how it functions, but for those who are not, generative artificial intelligence technologies are a subset of artificial intelligence technologies that use models based on patterns learned from large quantities of training data to generate new text, audio, or even images or video. A large language model is a type of generative AI designed to understand and generate human language. It achieves this by processing and analysing large volumes of text data from diverse sources such as books, articles, and websites. This model employs a complex mathematical algorithm and neural network architectures to learn patterns, relationships between words, and structures within a language. So large language models often take the form of a chatbot, such as ChatGPT, whereby you input a prompt and it chats back to you with its response. Now, again, I'm sure many people in the room have used ChatGPT, are aware of how it functions and how it works. But for those who haven't, I'll just give you a couple examples now of what it's capable of, I suppose. So here's just one example of maybe asking it for help with your dinner. What is the best way to cook asparagus? So it recommends roasting asparagus at around 220 degrees centigrade. Fair enough. I'd fry it myself, but whatever. So you could even ask it to write a poem. So I asked it to write a poem in the style of Robert Frost about the changing of the seasons from summer to autumn. The result, it's okay. It's not going to win any prizes, but it is certainly a poem answering that prompt. So then I was, this morning, I went to ChatGPT. I was thinking about how horrible I felt over the weekend, particularly at around 10 o'clock on Saturday, when I asked it, why do Ireland keep losing Rugby World Cup quarterfinals? And its response, as you can see, is quite detailed and it's offering a lot. I went back then and asked it for any practical, real world ways that I can, maybe bring this information to the IRFU, and it just told me that the Irish rugby team is actually cursed. So take from that what you will. But the reason we're all here today is because of the application of ChatGPT in higher education and in third level education. So just a few quick examples of what it's capable of in that regard. So here is a question from a first year physics module. I won't get into the details because I don't know anything about first year physics or any level of physics. But here's just an example of, you can see at the top, it's you input the essay question or the exam question, and it spits out a very detailed and very comprehensive answer. And then for my own discipline of film studies, here is a second year essay question. The result was, it's not great, but it's still capable of producing a very decent standard of answer. So there's just some examples of ChatGPT in action. So the toolkit, this is the front page of the toolkit. The toolkit that we are launching today is essentially a set of recommendations on the appropriate uses of generative AI to enhance learning in higher education, as well as emphasizing opportunities for new modes of teaching, learning and assessment that incorporate these tools across numerous disciplinary contexts. This toolkit also highlights various ways to counter or mitigate the unethical use of generative AI in assessment design. So these recommendations were born out of the work of students and staff from across UCC on the AI Squared research project, which was conducted throughout the summer. For this project, we adapted a student as partner approach, whereby students and academic staff worked in close collaboration. So back in May, we put a call out to students and staff across UCC, and we received close to 200 expressions of interest from students, from which we assembled a roster of both undergraduate and postgraduate student participants from each of the 4 colleges within UCC. So we asked participants, staff and students, to consider assessment design in the context of the looming threat or presence, I suppose, of generative AI. And we, of course, encourage freedom among staff and student participants to experiment with the software in whatever way they felt applicable in their discipline. So we asked the pairings to fill in a kind of a case study breakdown, I suppose, to focus on a specific example from their work on the project, one specific example of assessment design, and to fill in a detailed breakdown of their process. And these case studies provide the core material that has made up this toolkit, where we have from which we've plucked our recommendations, I suppose. So we're very pleased to welcome a number of these participants this afternoon who will be taking part in a panel discussion about their work on the project shortly. So now we're just going to go through a few elements of the toolkit. So I'll pass back to Loretta just to introduce that.
Yep, so the toolkit itself is it's quite long. It's broken into 3 separate parts, and they can be used in slightly different ways. So part 1 is kind of looking at all of that information and contextual information about Gen AI. So if anyone is coming to this and they're not familiar with what generative AI is, there is a lexicon of terms in there. There's a breakdown of what it is and how it works, particularly focusing on LLMs. We use ChatGPT as kind of an exemplar for this project. And then there is information about critical AI literacy, so points to be aware of in there, including privacy concerns, copyright infringement, misinformation, and bias hallucinations, as well as the environmental impact and exploitation of workers. And then there is a section on academic integrity as well, which includes kind of that breakdown of highlighting those values and also recommendations in terms of acknowledging use of Gen AI. And then there's a section on kind of what are some current capabilities and limitations of particularly ChatGPT. So this section, bearing in mind, it can be used by staff themselves to kind of orient themselves with this material, and these sections can also be used directly with students in as a kind of way to explain some of these topics. So it's a good little introductory piece on these topics if you are considering using AI at all in any assessments or in practice with students, or even if you aren't, just to kind of make them aware of these things. So this is kind of twofold in that it has that information for yourselves and information that can be used directly with students. Whereas part 2, I'll hand over to Tadhg again, is more about kind of the case studies and examples.
Yeah, so in the second part of the toolkit, we kind of break down the various forms of assessment that we identified through our work with the staff and student participants. So we kind of go through a risk assessment of all these various kinds of assessment, from formative assessment, summative assessment, diagnostic, authentic, and criterion referenced assessment. So we kind of identify the various risks associated with these forms of assessment, and how some are perhaps less at risk of abuse by generative AI than others. And then we have the case studies evaluating the use of ChatGPT to complete assignments. So we have examples, we have 2 examples from each of the colleges: business and law, arts, Celtic studies and social science, science, engineering and food science, and medicine and health. So I think for the panel today we have someone from everywhere except for CEFs. So we'll hear more from them in a little while. And then part 3, we go through some practice examples on the integration of Gen AI in learning activities. And Loretta, if you want to go through that.
So with this, we've kind of drawn from what was learned during the case studies and then from our own research in this area as well, to have sort of recommendations of how you might be able to use it. And most of these are in terms of learning activities rather than assessment, but they could be adopted for either. But it's things like how it can be used, examples of different ways it can be used as a study aid, examples of how it can be used as kind of a template for creating something that then can be critiqued, getting students to challenge ChatGPT to find the right prompts to get a standard of answers that they need, or to identify gaps in answers produced by ChatGPT. So these are bringing in all of those kind of that critical engagement pieces to the learning process, of where they're learning about its own limitations and capabilities, and also applying their own kind of research and knowledge of the subject area to that. So they're kind of coming in hand that way. So there's a few more in there, but they're all kind of based around the ideas pulled from what some of the case studies did. And then finally, there's some additional resources that are kind of linked to other guides around AI and assessment that have been produced by the National Academic Integrity Network, the European Network for Academic Integrity, as well as other universities and groups, and SATLE's short guide to assessment in the age of AI as well. So to kind of keep all those places linked together, that you can find them all there as well, if you want to kind of investigate further into this. So it's designed to be, I suppose, practical in use, in that the information is there to share with students, and then there are ideas in there as well to implement and use. So with that in mind, where is it located? Where can you find it? So at the moment it is in PDF format, linked to both SATLE's webpage, where there's the kind of little project bio or description there, and it can also be found on the Skills Center website under the Information for Staff section. There's a section in there on academic integrity and artificial intelligence, which also links to a few other resources for both students and staff, and this guide is up there as well. So we will be working on putting it in some sort of web format some stage as well, to make it a little bit more accessible, but right now you can access the full PDF in either of those places. And we'll bring this back up at the end of today, so you can, if you need to get back to it. But so now I'm just going to hand over to Tadhg to introduce the panel and invite the panelists to come up to the front as well, and we'll start that discussion now.
So, hello everyone, thanks for coming along today and agreeing to take part in this panel discussion. So I suppose just to kick off, can we just get a sense from you of what your experiences were with generative AI, with something like ChatGPT, prior to engaging with the project? And where would you like to kick off?
I can start at the top of the line.
So this is Alison McEwen, one of our student participants from CUBS.
Yeah, so I just finished my Master's in Human Resource Management. I'm working in the Cork City Council for our HR projects team, which is about implementing change in business process improvements there. So I was delighted to be a part of the project, and for me, ChatGPT was absolutely something that was really useful to me when I was in my Master's. And the first time it actually came to me even about to use ChatGPT was I was looking at a research paper, and there was a line in it around the statistical relevance of something, and my brain was like, this either means one thing or the exact opposite of it, and I can't tell. And I reached out to my friends, they were busy, and then I was like, wait a second, I can just ask ChatGPT to write this sentence in a phrase that I understand and remove the phrase I don't understand. And that was the beginning of some really helpful uses for it that, at least as far as I was concerned, I wasn't getting it to generate content for me or anything like that, but it actually just helped me to learn and absorb the information there.
So I'm Joe Feller, I'm one of the professors with CUBS, and I suppose it was very good timing when the project started, because past year or so, I've been sort of moving into this area from a research point of view anyway, and also from a teaching practice point of view. Looking at sort of broader applications of not just generative AI, but AI technologies in general, and particularly how they impact on like kind of the creative or communication intensive industries, of which higher ed is one, but also in terms of things like creative arts, creative writing, and so on, where I'm working with colleagues on these issues, sort of the broader industrial integrity and artistic integrity of a world where the school is out here.
So my name is Joel Walmsley. I'm a lecturer in the philosophy department, and prior to engaging with this project, I had a bit of experience with ChatGPT because one of the modules I teach in the philosophy department is on philosophy of artificial intelligence. So I thought it was too good an opportunity to miss in February or March of this year when I was assigning essay titles. And as you'll read about in the toolkit, I decided to reconfigure my essay assignment so that students were required to use ChatGPT as part of it and to connect that with the learning objectives and the things I was trying to accomplish in the module all along. I thought that that went quite well over the course of the module, and we can talk more about some of the details of that later on. But it struck me as a good way, on the one hand, to discourage students from using the tool illegitimately or using it to cheat. On the other hand, I thought since it's a new tool that's available, it's probably a good place for them to learn about the tool itself. So I had the opportunity to teach them a bit about how it works, what its strengths and weaknesses are, what its drawbacks are, and so on. I've just realised I've used the wrong metaphor, because thirdly, on the third hand, it was also a chance to do something that was a bit more fun for an essay writing project, rather than just a standard explain and evaluate kind of an essay question. A lot of the students regarded it as a project and a bit more enjoyable. So one student told me that they didn't really want to cheat because it was quite fun using ChatGPT. I don't know if that will actually happen in the future as people become more used to it, but at least for this year, I didn't want to miss that opportunity.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, my name is Harriet Skeldens. I'm a senior lecturer in anatomy and neuroscience. And beyond completing a project for a 10-year-old last minute, I have not as much experience with ChatGPT, but a lot of our assessments are based on sending students away with writing an essay on the cranial nerves, or write an essay on brains, and anything related with neuroanatomy is what I teach. And with the advent of ChatGPT, of course, and my own experience with my 10-year-old projects, I realized there was not much value in that if it doesn't go beyond just reproducing what ChatGPT spits out. But because it is here, how can I use ChatGPT in follow-up assessments, or how can I advise my students to use it as a study aid? So I kind of stepped into this project with that in mind, and also to identify, my students traditionally would look at textbooks or online resources, but could they also look at ChatGPT initially to learn everything about the cranial nerves, and what are the limitations there, and how to ask specific questions to get the information that's needed.
Hi all, my name is Madara. I'm also a lecturer in the Department of Anatomy and Neuroscience, and I'm also the director of the MSc Human Anatomy program. So my students would be the master's students. And before this project, I was using ChatGPT for my own personal things. Like give me a text of how do I respond and say goodbye to a friend who's not really a friend, and how do I accept a job by not accepting it properly. A reference letter for a student as well. I know I said it in one of the other talks as well. So I used it for a number of things, and I found it really helpful. And I was thinking of using it for my master's students in this current academic year. And then the call came out, and I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. So Harriet and I were both, since we're both from the same department, we jumped on board this project. So we worked with 2 medical students, principals, one of the medical students, and I also worked with 8 English students. It was enlightening. And moving forward, I'm delighted that you used ChatGPT for your module. I'm using it this year for an anatomy pedagogy module with the MSc students. So they knew about ChatGPT, some of them knew about it, some of them didn't. They haven't used ChatGPT, so I used it in class with them last week. I told them to head away and think about ideas. What would we do in the classroom as a small group of students and educator? We're brainstorming tomorrow, and we'll see what comes up. So yes, I'm hoping that it's a fun module for them as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Princey Machado, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at UCC. And first time I ever used ChatGPT was for the purpose of this project. And before that, I'd only ever seen my friends use it briefly. And I remember being in the canteen and one of my friends had put in, "Oh, hello, tell me something nice about myself." So that was one of the first things. So I thought, people use it for like fun things and like small things like that. And then some people told me, "Oh yeah, no, I'm actually using it to study." And I've never used it myself because I thought, oh, there's so much to study and lecture materials anyway. I didn't really think I had the time to look at extra things. So when I started the project, I found the first thing was the sheer volume of information that you can spit out to prompts you give it. So you could put in a broad topic, like my topic was the brachial plexus for this project, which is about nerves in the neck, and it kind of just spits out everything it knows, and then there's some things missing, so you have to kind of hone in on some things and say oh, there's 5 nerves altogether that make it up, so if there's dysfunction in one of the nerves, tell me everything that can go wrong, and how do I fix this part, especially if it goes wrong. And then the textbooks would have been handled because we had to compare ChatGPT with textbooks, and in textbooks you have images and you have things in bullet points, and it's just nice to look at that way, whereas ChatGPT is almost very clinical, and it's just paragraphs, so it can be quite straining to the eyes, is what I felt. One useful thing was that it gave a lot of useful kind of mnemonics or acronyms to help remember things, because in medicine and anatomy in particular, there's so much detail, so you have to kind of come up with quick and easy ways to remember things, and ChatGPT was very, very helpful, very creative for that. I actually can't remember the exact things it gave me, but I put in that prompt several times, and it was able to come up with several different ways to help you remember it, which I thought was very useful.
Thanks very much, everyone. So we've established your kind of prior knowledge or experience with the software. Do you want to tell us now about your approach to the project and how ChatGPT was used in that engagement with the student partner, and how you approach assessment design in that regard? I know, Joel, you've already done this in your own lecture, but I suppose if you want to kick off how you kind of you and your student partner kind of compared and contrasted the two assessments from one year to the next.
Yeah, so it was a good opportunity because although this year I rejigged my assignments so that the students were required to use them, the topics that they wrote their essays on were similar topics to what I taught in previous years. So it was an opportunity for me to sit down with my student partner and compare and contrast things. So in particular, I was keen to see whether an essay that required the use of ChatGPT would still meet the same learning objectives that used to be met by an old-fashioned essay, as I'm tempted to call it now, or whether this way of approaching it would be more enjoyable, or whether the student also would learn something about how ChatGPT or other forms of AI actually work, and how to use them responsibly as well, so to sort of learn some features of best practice in using it. So it was a nice opportunity, which I wouldn't otherwise have had, to compare and contrast the approach to writing essays on the same topic that either used ChatGPT or other forms of AI and those that didn't. And were some things that came up that I hadn't considered before, that I learned from getting feedback. So, for example, other uses of ChatGPT, if a student felt like they had writer's block, or they needed a quick way of brainstorming.
That seems to come up across nearly every discipline, that idea of overcoming, beginning an essay, overcoming writer's block.
Yeah. So as well as me sort of getting some feedback on the kinds of things I wanted to know about this novel way of designing assessment, I also got some information about how students might approach it that I hadn't considered before as well.
Joe, I think you were going to hop in there as well.
No, I'm just half deaf, and Joel and Joe said I was actually wondering what you were talking about when you said you knew I had just done this assignment.
But you want to?
But yeah, I'm happy to say, or actually, I'll hand it out to you because so what we did in Tufts and law, we had a student working with us from both college or both schools within college. And the thing is, law is fairly multidisciplinary, but there's a certain coherence to it. Tufts, on the other hand, has a dozen different degrees. And then graduate level, and then a couple of dozen of the, well, it's not right. There's a lot of different subjects. So we took a very scattershot approach to it, where Alice, I think, you looked at 3 different programs, and I went and looked at maybe 3 or 4 other programs as well, but all with existing assessments. So basically, here's a few exam questions from the previous year, here's a couple of pieces of CA that the lecturer might have given us and said, we might have a look at this. But I think that your engagement with it was actually really quite involved, and maybe you could talk through that and be more useful to me.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I suppose from my point of view, I really view ChatGPT as something that can be hugely beneficial, particularly for diversity and inclusion. Like I myself am neurodivergent, and so sometimes, like I think, for example, with that paper that I said, I just couldn't understand what it was saying, but I was able to reframe it. And also sometimes I can say something, I'm the person that will always go 10% over a word count, so trying to figure out how to say what I'm saying with less words is something where ChatGPT is hugely useful. And when I was participating in this project, one thing that I found was I was actually critically assessing what even are these assessments asking. This assessment is saying, write an essay on this, and it's saying it's taught you about this, but it hasn't taught you about this, it's testing, do you know this? You know, I'm really questioning what we want out of our assessments. And so it also kind of gave a lot to me as well in terms of how different departments within just clubs write the assessments. Like some gave really good guidelines, they gave the headings that they wanted, they detailed everything that they needed, which made it so specific that ChatGPT would be a better or a worse help, you know, depending on what it was looking for. And then other ones kind of just gave you, here's a workout, work away, you know. And so that really, even the influence of that in terms of clarity for the student, you know, and the clarity that they need to look for after. And I think particularly in clubs, as class sizes continue to expand, like I think the commerce degree when I was in it almost 10 years ago had a starting class of 300. And you know, so I can only imagine that's probably up above 400 now at least. And you're missing that one-to-one interaction, which where if you have a small question, it's not enough to go up to, like, it doesn't feel like enough to bother a lecturer with it, or you know, maybe there's a queue of 15 people waiting to ask the lecturer a small question. And ChatGPT can really just support that need for asking small clarifications and things like that. So I found a variety anyway of how well ChatGPT was able to substitute a student's answers, but in most cases you still needed that critical assessment, and I think it really brings into question and emphasises as well what is the real purpose of what we're teaching here in college. Are we here to teach critical thinking, which is, you know, obviously core, but it's becoming more and more core as ChatGPT is essentially just a super customized Google search engine. So evaluating and assessing what it's giving us is going to be critical, and it's the key to not allowing ChatGPT to kind of cause that plagiarism, I think. So I don't know if that answers the
Absolutely, thanks, Alison. And that, I suppose that idea of critically engaging with the outputs from ChatGPT is something that's highlighted frequently across the toolkit. And Harry, it's something that your work on the project kind of centered around challenging ChatGPT in a way to kind of match the work of the students in using their textbooks, I suppose.
Yeah, because Tahir already said it, our idea, our assessment was also to do the compare and contrast contrast. But because in anatomy, a lot of, and neuroscience and neuroanatomy specifically, there's a lot of detail that's required. So we found that if you ask a generic prompt, like I said already, tell me about the cranial nerves in my instance, that's what we asked the student to do, it was very top line what ChatGPT came back with you. We needed to increase the prompts. Now tell me something about the branches, tell me something about the function. So you had to really know a lot to be able to ask the right questions. So that made it clear for us that it can be a great study aid, but it will definitely not be able to replace, okay, tell me everything I need to know in this module on anatomy. It will not be helpful in that sense because you may be able to get just lots and lots of text, and then you'll have to ask it, okay, make this now categorize it for me. But what I do feel it would really help with is because the module I teach on neuroanatomy is not only anatomy, it's physiology, and it is biochemistry. So it can help with that cross-disciplinary understanding where you can feed it in prompts of what you know to get the validation and then say, now give me clinical relevance, or now tell me how I can assess this in the hospital, and those kind of things.
Yeah, like that is like, I think it really jumped out at me that, you know, you're not undermining any learning outcomes or intended learning outcomes. You're trying to get it up to speed with what you should know or what you should already know. Therefore, the student will have done the work, has to have done the work in order to get those responses. So it was a great approach, absolutely. Would you agree to jump in there as well?
I agree with Harry, because we both looked after medical students, so we were both sort of supervising, and the dentist student also sort of found the same results. So she put in like prompts of variation of the teeth, and it would give again very superficial information, and then there was a lot of repetition as well. So if the student is an expert, like she'd already done the module, so she could filter out what was repetitive and not needed, and then where it would give a term but not explain it or not use the proper term. So, you know, was it using layman's term or actual anatomical terminology? In that way, so you sort of need to have like a background knowledge actually to use it for anatomy and dental anatomy, rather than, you know, just as like the starting point of the module.
So I suppose, would any of you have any thoughts on like the future of this technology in higher education? Like what do you think, having gone through the processes of working on this project, engaging with students in this way, what do you see as the kind of future in terms of the integration ethically of something like ChatGPT into higher education?
Yeah, so a couple of comments. One would be going back to this idea that we were talking about in terms of this notion that there's a threat to academic integrity. And I think whenever we talk about academic integrity, whenever we talk about threats, there's always a danger of maybe unintentionally villainizing the student. And I think one of the things that I see happening is that there's a need for us to bring students clearly on the side, that their behavior, whether it's well-formed or ill-formed, is not actually the threat that we're worried about, but rather their behavior is the first line of defense against the threat they should be worried about, which is that 4 years from now or 5 years from now or however long they spend with us, they either go into a market that no longer exists, or they go into it having demonstrated to themselves irrevocably that they are less able to do that job than a machine. That's the mindset we need students to have, is to realize that when they graduate and they go into that first graduate role, they're going to be the first generation that basically moves immediately into a management position. Because if you count out 4 years from now, every piece of entry-level work is going to involve a small army of agents of some sort that are helping those knowledge workers do their job. And to be able to critically manage that workforce, this AI workforce, to be able to have demonstrated to themselves and their peers and their faculty that they are at a level above the machine. To me, that's how we're going to really get at the threat. And to me, that's how we're going to build the sort of ethos that we need people to have coming into it. And I think once we have that ethos, there's a lot of fun stuff that can be done here, right? So like, even what you were talking about just a minute ago when you were saying, oftentimes staff take for granted that their assessments make sense. And students are intimidated. I don't want to bother you with this little question. Well, maybe we should just build it into our actual workflow that when you set an assessment as an educator here at this university, the first thing you do is drop it into ChatGPT or similar and say, tell me all the ambiguous things. Tell me all the questions you would have where it's not clear what I'm asking. Right? And let's build better assessments that way. And let's actually look at the idea that a student can use these tools as essentially having their own personal research system from day one at the university. And actually build assessments that are scoped appropriately with that resource in mind. Say, you know what? Last year I asked a group of students to do X, but I'm actually going to ask you to do X plus 1. Because you're going to have a little help here. And that's going to get you over some slog, and we're going to be able to do something that's going to create maybe a little bit more value for you and the rest. So I think that mindset of seeing this as a tool, which is not a threat in itself, but which is one that is going to transform more or less every industry that we graduate our students into, not to mention the industry that we're all working in. And so being able to take that step above it, and to, I quite like the word responsibility and the opening kind of ethos, right? That really, that sense of ownership is, I think, key to everything.
Yeah, I think Michael kind of picks the idea of like the little research assistant is really how I view ChatGPT, and I think in a lot of ways it can increase fairness, which is obviously core to academic integrity from the student point of view. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at the assessment of critical thinking and creating ideas, and to an extent, the English language is the best we're using to translate those and to convey them. But there are some people that are just more, naturally adept and adapted to speaking the academic words, and framing them in those sentences. And there are people that have amazing ideas, but they won't necessarily be able to convey them in a way that will get them the marks. And like ChatGPT, like I said, can just be brilliant even just for that of going, I have a jumble of thoughts in my head, I'm going to put them all down here. Can you tell me my own words back, but in a way that makes more sense? And I really think when we look back at what is that support network, and that is around Student Skills Centre has been an amazing addition. But it's all those kind of little bits of on-the-fly bits and things like that really come to it. And again, I always say I'm very lucky to come from a family that have quite academic interests and from friends that are also academically inclined. And so there are people I can turn to and bounce ideas off of. And I don't think I could have gone through my master's without one or two friends in particular to just go, what am I saying here? But ChatGPT is something then that can be really valuable for people that are coming from a place where they are interested in academics and they may not have that support around them or people to turn to as well. It's literally a virtual research assistant.
And as you made the point earlier that it helped you use Excel, even like how to, like those technical kind of prompts that you put into it. So there's another benefit.
Yeah, if we're talking about even just in work, I've actually been helping my own colleague get better with Excel by I showed him ChatGPT and allowed him to explore what Excel can actually do for him. Because a lot of time you can approach Excel of all things and be like, oh, this is really awkward, I wish there was a way I could do this. And Google might spit out 10 help sites, but it's not actually answering your question. Whereas ChatGPT allowed him to go, actually, can Excel do this thing? And goes, yeah, you just do this. It's really kind of helped him move forward.
Brilliant, thanks. Harry, you were going to...
Yeah, I think both excellent points, and really enjoyed your comments specifically, that it is great to hear that it can be such a accessible point for multiple and diverse students to ask things in different ways and get answers you need to move on to the next ones. And also how you can use it across schools. And I think in the future, in the near future, and this project is a great initiative for that. We need to be more vocal to students that we are not wanting to stay away from it, but we're figuring out with you how best we can use it for the different programs and indeed have a little bit of fun with it as well.
The one thing that struck moving so quickly that we're, at least I'm struggling to keep up with the places it's popping up. And one thing that occurs to me that made me think that it won't be long before I have to rethink the assessment design again is the fact that right now, ChatGPT, for example, is a separate thing. Right? So you have that open in one window, and then you're writing your essay, and if you're writing my essay, you take a screenshot of what happened in one, you have to paste it into the other. But it won't be long before the kind of tools you get in ChatGPT and other kinds of generative AI are just embedded in our processing software,
happening.
in our search engines and that sort of thing. So it becomes much harder then to know when we're just using a conventional word processing tool and when we're using some kind of AI-powered tool as well. So that's something that we'll have to continually adapt to, I think, because as it stands right now, it's easy to distinguish when we're using the AI and when we're doing our own thing. But I think that will become increasingly difficult as the technology becomes more and more embedded.
Absolutely.
I actually, sorry. I don't feel like I'm humming. On that point, it was only today actually when discussions were being had, I only thought about, I regularly use obviously PowerPoint, I think a lot of people do, and there's a function in PowerPoint called Designer, and obviously that's generative AI.
You thank Designer for this.
I know. That's a familiar. But no, it was something I was like, I've been using AI for years. I've used them in my college presentations. I never even thought about that as being potentially cheating, and I don't think many people would consider it if it was asked. But yeah, it's built in, and you don't think twice. You know, even Microsoft Word, the editor function is getting fancier, and they are in a beta program for a thing called Copilot. So that's for the go to everything. So yeah.
I think we're a good bit over the hour, so we might